All right, we now have our base plate right here. Now this base plate is bigger than our buttress and bezel, which is fine. We will cut this off, cut the excess off. But what we need to do is we need to mark our base plate so that when we pickle it and we start building our ring, no one else thinks it's their base plate. So right in the center, and if you need to put a mark there, you can. Right in the center, we're going to put our maker's mark. And so I'm going to take my my stone or my stamps, and I'm just going to put my maker's mark. Now, I'm going to put my maker's mark on both sides. Why am I going to put it on both sides? Because that way, once I put my stone in my ring, it can be seen from the other side also. So I'm going to put my maker's mark on both sides. Okay. So I have my maker's mark on both sides, and the bezel and buttress fit nice and comfortably on this. If I were to bring this up like this, you see that the bezel and the buttress are touching the base plate. You should have no gap. There should be zero gap between this area right here and the base plate. Zero gap. Bezel is super tight, and we can kind of go in and see it maybe. It should be tight right here, all the way around, and then all around the buttress. That should be super, super tight so that when we solder, the solder will attach the base plate and the buttress and the bezel together. Now it's time to solder those things, the base plate, bezel, and buttress. All right, at this point we have our bezel, our base plate, and our buttress ready to go. If you need to, you can ensure or recheck that the stone fits nicely in the setting by just holding it and pressing it through, and that the base plate, and the bezel and buttress are all touching. Okay, you see that that's in this area right here. You want it all to touch. You don't want the base plate and the bezel and buttress to look something like that. You want it all touching down. Now it's time to solder these three pieces together. So once again, ensure that the stone fits, and it fits nice. Okay, I'm going to take that out, and I'm going to attach it to my leash. And now I'm going to solder the base, solder it all together. Now when I solder it, I'm actually going to use the tripod. Okay, here's the tripod with the small screen. You don't want to use the large metal screen because the large steel will hold on to the metal, allowing that metal to conduct into the silver, and it will melt it. So you don't want to do that. You want to use this small screen. Now, I'm going to take all of my pieces, and I'm going to take my bezel and buttress, and they're all attached. I'm going to attach it to I'm going to put it on, and then I'm going to take the base plate. I'm going to dunk that in the boric acid, and I'm going to position it nicely. And as I position it, before I turn it on, I'm going to position this so that I see metal all the way around the buttress. I don't want it off because that will not end well. It won't look very good. I want metal off of, I want a metal border around the whole entire thing. I'll burn, and now I'm going to burn off the boric acid. And you see those flames. Now, once again, you ensure that the bezel and the buttress are touching all the way around. You don't want any gapping from the base plate to the buttress or the bezel. That'll be a hole, and it won't, the solder doesn't fill holes. All right, now I'm going to take some flux, and I'm going to put some flux inside and just slightly around my stone setting. Because the flux kind of bubbles, I'm going to take my my torch, and the torch I'm using is now the medium-sized torch. Okay, because I have more metal, and I'm melting this metal. I'm melting the solder. So I'm just going to slowly, it'll bubble, which is fine. So it'll have that crusty, which is fine. Now I'm going to take my solder, and I'm going to place the solder inside of the setting. Okay, so I'm going to take about 4 to 5 pieces of solder and strategically place them evenly around the setting, so that when it melts, it will melt around the bezel and the buttress. Now I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to show you kind of so that you see. Now these aren't perfectly positioned, and I can move these. But what I'm going to do when I start heating up is I'm going to heat from the bottom, and I'm going to heat around the outside of the bezel. Okay, the solder flows where the heat is. So if the outside of the bezel is the hottest, the solder will flow from the inside, going underneath the bezel, going underneath the buttress, and attaching itself to the base plate. If I just heat from the top here, it'll just pool up in the middle. I don't want that. So I'm going to heat from below, and I'm going to go in circular motions, just going outside. Now I might bring up my torch to the top to heat it up a little bit, but then I'll go back down below to make sure that it's connected and it flows properly. I've got to be careful. You do not want this metal to get red hot. You've already soldered it twice, the bezel and the buttress. You don't want these seams to break. So here we go. And as I go, I might move and kind of adjust the solder if I need to. So I'm going to just heat this up a little bit. And I can go in and I can kind of push these to the side. And then I come up from below. And I'm just heating it up. Now I'm going to move some of the solder. I'm keeping my torch alive. Keeping it alive, and I'm just heating it up. Now you'll see kind of go greenish if I need to. So I'm just heating it up around the outside. And you'll see it go. You see it turn that mercury. And there goes the solder. And if it goes really red, I kind of pull it away. So it should be good, and I'm just gonna hit it from the top a little bit. I'm keeping my torch alive. I'm not just letting it sit there. If you let the torch just sit there, it will melt your metal. So it looks like I see, as I look around, I see that there's a little bead of solder around all this inside, and it is soldered correctly. Now, once it's soldered, so the solder flowed underneath, and now it's soldered all the way around, I'm going to take this and I'm going to put it in the water.